Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's Orbit Live event with fantasy authors Rowenna Miller and Tasha Suri. Rowenna is the author of the Unraveled Kingdom series, which concludes with Rule, which is out today in the US. You can buy it by clicking on that handy green button at the bottom of the screen. Tasha is the Astounding Award-nominated author of Empire of Sand and the companion novel Realm of Ash. You can buy both of those through that green button, too. Rowenna and Tasha will be talking to each other about their books, but they'll also be taking your questions. You can ask those questions using the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. You can also vote on questions submitted by others so that the most popular questions are the first to get answered. If you're watching via Twitter or Facebook, feel free to ask questions in those platforms and I'll relay them to the authors. You can follow Orbit Live on Crowdcast to be notified about future author events. Next week, we'll have a conversation between fantasy authors Evan Winter and K.S. Veloso, which I think will be a lot of fun. And now, please join me in welcoming Rowenna and Tasha.
Hi.
Hi, everybody.
How's everyone doing?
I should just mention, we did not intend to coordinate florality. This was a happy accident.
It was. Well, we had decided that we were going to at least upgrade from wearing pajamas because I don't know about Tasha, but I haven't put on real pants in about 3 months. So we thought this is a great opportunity to wear something, not leggings and a sweatshirt. And then this happened. So,
should we start answering questions?
I think we should just dive into questions because there are already 7 of them, and you can keep asking as we go, by the way. So vote for questions, but also if yours is not asked yet, jump in and ask it. Do you want to pick one first, Tasha, and we'll launch from there?
I might go with the one that's top voted, which is from EB. It says, what's the biggest misconception you've heard people express about the time periods your books are based on? For example, Rowenna, I've seen you talk about how corsets are actually quite comfortable.
Yes. I mean, I think we probably both deal with a lot of misconceptions about historical times and places and how we translate those into fantasy worlds. And of course, I always think first, it is fantasy, so you're allowed to change things, even if you are doing so intentionally. But yeah, I think it's kind of a fun thing to play with history. I will say yes, corsets actually are pretty comfortable if they're made to fit you. That's kind of the key, is that they have to be fitted to you and laced appropriately. Actually, if they're too loose, they're really uncomfortable because they shift around and chafe, and that's not good. I think one of the biggest things that I notice is that people treat history like it's all the same. There's this time called back then, and everything was the same then. And really, history isn't a foreign country, like they say. History is a million different foreign countries, and they all have their own unique norms and circumstances. And yeah, one thing I've noticed, I guess, for example, is what professions were available to women in different times and places. And one that even surprised me was that there were female blacksmiths in the 18th century. So that was
extremely cool.
To find. Yeah, and I think it was Colonial Williamsburg actually has a woman on as a blacksmith, and they kind of were catching some flack for it, oh, this is just PC nonsense. And it was no, there actually were women who worked as smiths. So, it's being open to the weird historical realities is
I remember reading, I think, something by Mary Robinette Kowal talking about the fact that when you read historical fiction or historical fantasy, often those authors have had to essentially lie or take out bits of real history because they read as anachronistic to a modern audience. And I think with fantasy, you kind of have the dual issue of people have a sense of what constitutes a fantasy. And if you bring in something that they feel is anachronistic to the kind of narrative tradition of fantasy, you have to kind of back it up and explain it, even if the history you're drawing from really had those things.
Exactly.
I can't think of a specific example, right. But the blacksmith is a good example, actually.
But no, I think you're totally. Are there any specific ones from your books that you've had people bring up or be surprised by when maybe they shouldn't be surprised?
I think I'm very lucky in that a lot of Western audiences know nothing about Mughal history and therefore have no questions or opinions for me. on how accurate I've been. I guess one of the things that does seem to be a common misconception is that women were powerless in the Mughal era is really long, but were powerless in the Mughal era, which is just absolutely not true. I mean, it was a patriarchal society, much like the one we live in now and ones in the past. So women were in positions where they didn't have a lot of power, but there were also women who had a lot of power and had more property rights and independence than a lot of women in some parts of Western Europe had. So it was quite interesting drawing on that history in writing and knowing that some people just don't know that that was the case.
Absolutely. And I think since we both too write about women in time periods that maybe they had, on average less power than now, one thing I was kind of like try to remember is there's a difference between overt power and agency. And that I think sometimes people are shocked when you write female characters with agency, even though they might not have political power or economic power in a situation, that doesn't mean a character can't have agency.
One of the things I loved in your books actually was that you look at the agency of women who both women who are in the upper echelons of society, but also women who are working class and are trying to make their own living and are running their own businesses. And I think that the concerns of women in that position are not often written about in fantasy as much as, say, princesses or queens or women who have some position in traditional power structures. So it was really nice to see you explore that.
Thank you. It was fun to do. Let's see what else people are asking about. Tasha, I have one for you.
Oh.
What are the chances you'll write any more books set in Amba?
I see someone said, I hope for either a novella or a short story. Well,
that was Lois. Thank you for your
Thank you,
Lois.
Honestly, at the moment, pretty low. I'm not contracted to write a novella or a short story set in the Books of Amber or another novel, which means that with the other projects that I'm working on, it's just not going to be a priority for me. I would love to write more in that world. And at some point, if I have time and inspiration, I think I would go back and maybe write a short story. Maybe I'll share it via the mailing list or something like that. I'd love to write something about Meher and Amon's daughter, because she's a character that's in my head that doesn't really get any screen time in the books. I think she's there for a sentence and I don't even provide her gender. So hooray, now you know.
Oh, now we know. Big reveal. You heard it here first.
Little girl. But I'd wanted to one day write her story, and maybe I will in some form, but there isn't really going to be a continuation for the Books of Amber beyond the existent duology. Sorry. Let me have a look and see if I can find another question. Okay, so this one looks pretty popular, and it's sort of addressed at both of us. From Travis, it says, both of your first books also work as standalones. How do you wrap up a story in a satisfying way while leaving enough room for sequels?
It's a good question. Tasha, when you wrote Empire of Sand, had you written that intending a duology, or was that written as a standalone? If you don't mind sharing.
I wrote it thinking that it could work as a standalone, but have standalone related sequels. I didn't know how many I would write. So I've grown up reading a lot of romance. And I think that that kind of format is very popular in romance. You'll find books that you can pick up without reading the first, the second, or the third. You can pick up the fifth. They're all in a connected world, but they are still separate. And that was kind of what I was going for. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious because I wrote Torn as a standalone with series potential. So
did you really?
So it was written to kind of like it could end, it could just stop now and we could be over. So I think that made it easier to have a satisfying conclusion on it while still kind of busting out the walls a little bit to make it bigger if I needed to. Because I hadn't had it, like when I first started that book, I hadn't thought it out in my head as how would I write this as a trilogy. It was like, well, let's write this one and then see kind of where it goes. So there were things that I had to kind of actually go back and instead of actually cutting things for the most part with that draft, I was adding things to kind of seed like
little bits to work on.
Right, we can continue this later. This could actually build up into another story later. So I think a lot of, to answer Travis's question, for me, a lot of it was just the circumstance of having written kind of intentionally as a standalone, kind of as that kind of writing strategy?
I think a lot more authors are in that position now. I don't think that, at least my experience has been, not many fantasy authors are in the position to think that they would be writing, let's say, a 6-book series like may have been done in the past. So you always want your book to kind of work alone and be satisfying, just in case it's going to be a standalone. You don't always know when you start sending books out on submission to an agent or to an editor. You don't know what's going to happen. So you need to be in that position. I think knowing that, for me, knowing the first book was about one character and the second book would be about another meant that I could focus on trying to make sure the character's narrative arc was finished within the book. So I left threads open in both books, actually, that could be dealt with by other characters, but the actual character journey was done. So, should we do another question?
I think so. Let's see what's popping up.
Oh, and just a reminder, you can send in more questions now that we've answered those. Just keep putting them through.
Yes. All right. Another question from Travis. What area of history are you most passionate about, and how do you work this into your writing? So I have a feeling we could probably talk about this for the rest of our time together. But what areas of history are you passionate about, Tasha, and how do you work them into your writing?
I'm passionate about the Mughal era of history. I'm sure that's a humongous surprise to everyone. Such a shock. It's not the only period of history that I love, but it's but I was at, I don't know why I'm rambling. At one point I became really interested in learning more about Indian history, and I wanted to know about sort of the early modern and medieval period, which the Mughal period covers. It's quite a long period of history. But it's also one that's really interesting for me to look at because it has a lot of English language sources that I could read, whereas there are other aspects of Indian history that I'd love to learn more about that don't have a lot of English language resources. And as somebody who doesn't read, let's say, Persian or Farsi or Sanskrit, I'm kind of limited in what I can engage with. I work it into my writing by reading the history and doing the research. And that provides you with humongous numbers of ideas that you can use to influence your work. Because history is weird and people did a lot of strange things. And if you try and explain it to someone, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, I think that you probably have some better examples than me, but my favorite one from Mughal history is literally that there was a rebellion against the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb. And this rebellion was led by a witch, is the translation, who brought horses to life, made from wood. And the only way that she could be defeated was by Aurangzeb praying over flags and sewing scripture from the Quran into them to make them impervious to her magic. Which, did that happen? I don't know, but apparently it did.
I want to know more about the horses. This is fascinating.
I'll see if I can find the original source.
A Tower of Skulls? Was that something I remember you talking about at one point?
Yes. There were many Towers of Skulls. So this was sort of it was early Mughal era, but they were well into their skull towers. They were towers of severed heads. It was a nice way of showing that you'd won the battle because, if everybody's heads are in a tower.
Like, I counted them up. I won. I collected the most. I collected them all.
Yes. But the one thing that I always wonder about these Tower of Heads is how they were balanced on each other, but this is not a question that anyone's been able to answer for me. Like, how do you make sure that it has a good secure base? Maybe you don't need to, maybe it only needs to last long enough to terrify people, then it can fall down. Unclear.
And a lot of these kinds of questions, we'd say, well, you just, experimental archaeology, you go out and you try it until you figure out how it works, but you can't do that with severed heads.
No, nobody will give me heads. No. Nobody will give me heads. There's also a fabulous story. That's my cat. I don't know if you can hear that. Asami? I can't show her to you, but you can probably hear her.
Yes,
she's very loud.
Chatty.
What was I talking about? History. There's a great story about a particular severed head that was turned into a golden drinking cup. And again, no one can tell me how the head was turned into a drinking cup. I would show you the cat, by the way, but I would have to lean down to pick her up and she would not thank me.
Maybe she'll join us of her own accord at some point.
Maybe at some point
We'll
she will deign to get on the table.
With her, just honor us with her presence. I think for me, when it comes to what I'm most interested in history, I'm really interested in the ordinary, kind of everyday people's experiences. So I get really interested in really mundane questions like, so how would you thicken that stew, or things like that. So probably why I really get into sewing and recreating historical textiles is because there's that pragmatic element if I can actually figure out how they did this. So I mean that definitely translated into the Unraveled Kingdom books pretty obviously because it was a seamstress and she was sewing.
You do historical recreation as well, don't you? No, you can get to that in a minute. I'll let you finish.
I do. I say overall, I think it's just that kind of impetus to have that. If you have a major historical event happening, whether it's real or whether it's fantasy, what were ordinary people doing? The people who didn't necessarily have a choice in how things were going to go, what choices were they going to make for themselves? And how did they experience what was happening around them? And how do they still experience like their everyday life? Like we were talking about before we went live, just kind of in the middle of history right now, but we all still have like ordinary things going on in our lives. Like I was sharing, I had friends who had to put off a wedding, and it's like that's concurrent with major global events. These
are high stakes events for real people now, and it makes you think how huge events in history have like micro stakes that are also really, really important to the individuals that they affect.
Right. And we often talk about stakes with writing, and I think that it's really important to remember that the stakes are what matter to the character, to the individual, not necessarily just what matters on a global scale.
Shall we go to another question?
Sure. Oh, we have more cropping in here. Wonderful.
Shall I pick up this one?
Sure.
Yeah. I'm going to skip past the one about historical fantasy. I'm going to go for please tell us about your cats, because
yes,
because mine is here.
One of them is introducing herself.
She's moved away, so I can't pick her up. I'm going to see if I can grab her.
Yeah, I don't know where mine are. I have two cats. I have Sophie Biscuit, and I know she has the same name as my main character, and that was not intentional at all. It just
Who was named
happened.
First?
Sophie Biscuit the cat came first. And then I often, when I'm trying to come up with a name for a main character, I'll go through multiple ones and then finally something sticks. And so I'd finally like landed on Sophie as a main character name. And then I probably realized a couple days later, like, oh God, I named my character after my cat. But
Kay has said that Sophie Biscuit is a great name, so you do have some support.
And she's Sophie Biscuit. It's the whole name. I named her Sophie. And then she was this cute little kitten. And she was a real dope, and she kept getting herself into trouble. Like she climbed our Christmas tree and couldn't get down, and she got her head stuck under a door. We lived in this older house at the time, and the door didn't quite flush to the floor, and she got her head kind of like, and she was crying. It was terrible. But I kept saying she's like a little biscuit who's still kind of doughy in the middle. Like she's not baked all the way through, so she's just another little Sophie Biscuit. She's learned a lot since then. She's less dopey now. But now we have a second cat who we got really from my older daughter. It's kind of her cat, but his name is Leo, and he's a huge orange tabby, and he is such a doofus. He's a sweetheart. He's the sweetest cat. We picked him because we went to the shelter to like look at the cats and let my daughter kind of go in and like play with them, and he came over. She was like 4. He came over to her and was like climbing all over her and purring. And we're like, well, that's the one. It's not only putting up with a child, but it wants to be with the child. That's unusual for many cats. So
it is, yes. You may have noticed that my cat is very noisy. She's curled up on her side going, love me, at the moment. But too far away for me to reach, which is a typical cat behavior.
Yep.
Her name's Asami. She's a tortie and white, and a calico, I guess, is a better way of putting it, isn't it? Mm-hmm. She's very high-strung. She hates all men, dogs, wrapping paper, but she doesn't really like very many things. I will say that. But she's very loud, and she's very sweet, and very demanding. And she's an old lady now, so she's allowed to be. But she's very good at hiding in very, very small spaces, so we do lose track of her quite easily.
That's impressive.
Yeah. Yeah, she's just all scrag, basically. She's very, very small for a cat, I suppose. Are you small for a cat? Yes. She's just rolled over again.
She's like, yes.
Look at
me.
I'm very small. Yes, look at me, admire me. Don't do your work.
Like, come on, what could possibly be important on that screen?
Exactly. I feel like I should take a picture of her and share it later.
You should.
Demonstrate what she's been doing.
I probably have pictures of my cats on my phone. I can probably find those while we're looking up the next question. I'll see if I have any cat pictures.
I'm sure you have hundreds of cat pictures.
I probably do, though I had to keep cleaning out my phone because my phone's really old and the memory is getting low, and this is a really bad time to go phone shopping. So I'm like...
Yeah, my phone is in a similar position, but maybe it's just pandemic phone. I don't know.
Limping by. It is. It's this new tragic circumstance of pandemic phone. All right. Good question. From Lord Voldemort. How do you build some magical physics that makes sense altogether? I signed in the Twitter. I'm sorry about my name. It's all right. We love it. We think it's fantastic.
No, it's brought us so much joy.
So how do you make a magical system make sense?
Your editor shouts at you, of course.
Yes, that's true.
That's the way. But we had the same editor for our books, didn't we? So I think that we were probably encouraged to build systems that made logical sense in similar, gentle but directed ways. I find that I start with a cool idea and then I have to make it logical later and build the rules in. I don't know if that's the case for you.
It's somewhat, though. I think the idea and I'll back up. I think that for mine, a big part of it was that the idea and the limitations went together.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that a huge part of any magical system is what are the limitations? If you can do one magical thing, why can you not just do all magical things? How do you constrain it? So the fact that was kind of built in when I had the idea of it's just a little charm that just subtly influences, kind of started to build the whole thing out for me.
I did wonder whether yours sort of came with inbuilt rules, partly because you were using sewing as a basis. So it has, sewing has practical limitations. It does specific things,
Right.
I realize making clothes is quite a big thing that sewing does, or making anything. Yeah.
It's not, it wasn't spell magic where you say something and something happens. It wasn't potion magic. It's a very specific sort of thing. But no, I think it's interesting. I mean, you can get away with almost anything if you're writing it well enough that people suspend their disbelief, and it's internally consistent. If it makes sense within the world, people don't have a moment where they say, like records screech, hold on, let me back up. It's like, well, this just works within, you made a playground for me, and this is how gravity works in this playground, and I will accept it, and I will roll with it. And honestly, I think sometimes we turn to fantasy for that. We kind of want something that's going to be a little bit bonkers and knock us off our feet a bit, but we want to roll with it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I know that with my magic systems, often my get out clause is the power of love, and I realize I do that. But the power of love is the most powerful magic, and it defeats every logic of every magic system I've ever made. But I do know with things that I really enjoy, like the fantasy novels I love and the TV shows I love, and I will not name any specific TV shows.
You won't? Are you sure?
I won't. I'm sure I won't. Rowenna's laughing because I love The Untamed, and it was inevitable that I would mention it at some point.
And I also love The Untamed. And
are you watching it now?
I am like halfway through.
Okay, I won't tell you anything.
I haven't finished because it's really slow because my family's home all the time and they don't want to watch it. So.
That's fair enough. I can understand why small children may not want to watch subtitled Chinese dramas, but
it's true. I don't know why. I'm raising them wrong.
But see, I think that's a great example because although it's although some shows adhere to narrative traditions that we may not be familiar with about their magic systems, or have magic systems that don't make sense, your mileage may vary. if you have bought into the world and you bought into the characters and you bought into the fantasy, which is what fantasy is, I think that you accept a lot of magical physics not making sense, which I think is the real which is a real skill that we want to kind of bring in as authors, so that we don't have to have a whole like compendium that explains how our magic system functions.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, there is a domino effect that if you introduce magic to your worlds, like you've knocked down a domino and other things are going to go with it. That if you have magic, well, why should anything work the same as it does anywhere else that doesn't have magic? Political systems of governance, systems of religion, like these things all end up kind of getting tapped a bit by having magic. I think the stronger your magic, the bigger the hit from the domino is. But, I think as long as you're kind of cognizant of that and build that in and are careful with folding it all in together, it's fun to write and it's fun to read too.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm going to have a look and see if there's another.
And while you do, I do have a picture. This is one of my cats. This is Sophie Biscuit.
Oh,
she's sleeping in a basket.
So cute.
She's a little cinnamon roll. She just like dives into anything. And
she looks like a cinnamon roll.
She is a complete little cinnamon roll. And I don't know if I have a Leo picture.
Okay, I'm going to see if it shows on the screen because I wasn't convinced it would. But this is what my cat is still doing on the floor next to me. There we go. Oh no, it's not really showing.
I can no, she's doing like the back flop though. No, can you actually pet
there we
her
go.
belly? Or
she's one of the few cats in the world that likes her belly scratched.
Wow.
Don't know why. Apparently she's fine with that, nothing else.
Yeah, that's unusual. And I found a Leo picture. This is Leo. And he has a blep.
Oh, his derpy little
got a
face.
Fantastic blep happening there. It's my little dopey cat.
I see Lois said that her niece's cat loves belly rubs too, so there's two of them in the world.
Yes.
I have one.
Leo
Lois's
does too, but then he
other.
gets excited. He likes it,
yeah.
and then he's like, "But are we playing?" And he actually does do velvet paws though. He will pull his claws in and then play, which is I'm very impressed with him.
Okay, so the most highly rated question is from Travis. And it's, other than your own, what single book has had the most impact on your career as a writer? Do you want time to think about this one?
I have to think about this one. I'm not allowed to say The Lady's Guide to Plain Sewing, am I? That's not.
You are allowed to say that because I'm curious about why.
Oh no, it's an 18th century sewing manual. It's like, here's how you sew. Here's what you do. But
that would be quite an interesting answer.
Yeah. Though in some ways the existence of all of those books is, at least on the Unraveled Kingdom series, is an influence on that. Just the fact that people were writing these things down and publishing them, and then we get to read them and see, what was their recipe for watermelon rind pickles, and I can literally make a recipe for watermelon rind pickles and say, oh, this is how someone 300 years ago made pickles. That is kind of a major influence, I guess, though it's probably not quite the vein of answer that Travis is looking for. So I will keep thinking, and if you have any you were hoping I'd ramble for a while longer.
Well, I was, but I will give it's a cliched answer, okay? And Travis says it's a good answer that you gave, right. So my answer is really cliche and very orbit, I guess, but The 100,000 Kingdoms by N.K. Jemisin had a huge impact on me.
That's not cliched. That's a good answer. It's a good book.
I don't know, because she's so good. It's like saying Ursula Le Guin or something, like, I don't know. But anyway, it's I was at university when I read it, and I was in that position where I was like, well, fantasy's all, white men with swords, which is fine because I read that. And I didn't really know where my voice would fit into fantasy, if at all. And I thought, I'll never be able to write that. I guess I'd better write a literary novel about somebody having an affair. I don't know what to do. And then I read 100,000 Kingdoms, and it had, a lot of the kind of tropey stuff that I love that I didn't think would ever be lauded. And, like, there is a dark and mysterious sexy god. There is a young woman. There is, lots and lots of people vying for power. There is a little tiny god. I don't know. It's that kind of stuff that you kind of see in fantasy, but has always kind of been denigrated and is very kind of like, that's what women like, not what is good. I don't know if I'm explaining that very well, but when I read that book, I thought, fantasy doesn't have to be straight up Western. It can be very innovative and interesting. It can take things that have like been traditionally, you know what I mean, derided as very much things that women enjoy only, and what women like sucks, so whatever.
Right. Women's stuff goes over here in this bin.
Yeah, that goes over there. And it can be lauded as really amazing and good quality. And that book opened the door for me to seeing that there is a long tradition of fantasy that is non-Western and is also focused on women's concerns and on the concerns of queer people, and is just generally much more diverse than I'd ever understood. And that influenced me to be able to write the kind of things that I really want to write. So, yeah, that's my answer.
I love it.
Excellent, thank you.
Did you grow up reading a lot of fantasy, Tasha? Was that like...
Yeah, my mom was a big fantasy reader and a romance reader. She'll kill me for having said that, but never mind.
Don't tell Tasha's mom. We're talking.
No, nobody tell her. But I read Terry Pratchett. Too young, didn't really understand what it was about. Thought it was great. Thank you for saying there's nothing wrong with reading romance.
There is nothing wrong with reading romance. It's true.
And I read the Elenium series and the Bulgariad series, so the kind of typical kind of Eddings books. I also read a lot of paranormal romance, so that had a big influence on me too. Like it was, I really loved like Nalini Singh, who I read when I was in my 20s, but still counts. And Marjorie Liu, because the books were, again, oddly very diverse, very interesting, cast all over the world, using magic systems that were not just Western, were also steamy romances. And those had an influence on me too. So what did you grow up reading?
I read a lot of the kind of like classic kids fantasy stuff. So like the Narnia books and the Borrowers, which I was just remembering the other day, which is kind of, it's not as like, fantasy, world fantasy, but it's kind of fantasy. And the Lloyd Alexander books, I loved those as a kid.
I'm not sure I know those ones.
The Black Cauldron. And,
oh yeah, okay, yeah.
Yes. So I read a lot of those, and I also read a lot of like historical fiction. So like the Dear America books and the American Girl books, which it's been really fun because I just dug a bunch of those out of boxes in the basement and had given them to my kid, and she's like blowing through them, which is kind of fun because I'm like, oh, see if these hold up, and see if people still like these. But yeah, and I don't know about you, I was always reading as a kid.
Constantly. Yeah,
I actually loved like standardized test day at school because we would get to read after we finished the test. So
you would just race through the test,
standardized state tests. I'm so excited. I get to read after I'm done in my folder fort, because they would make us build little forts out of folders. And then this
is a very different experience from my schooling, but I'm happy for you.
It was only a few days a year, but
I'm seeing a fair number of comments sort of saying that people hadn't read romance before and have only recently, I think Lois has said, only recently sort of engaged with it. Mm-hmm. And yes, romance is wonderful. That's my contribution to that.
Yes. Well, and it's not a tiny, it's a big genre. There's a lot in it.
Bigger than fantasy.
Like if you don't like, if you pick up one and you don't like it might not be that you don't like romance. It's that you didn't like that one or that particular slice out of the genre.
Oh yeah, much like fantasy. I think there's so much fantasy out there that's so different from each other that like I feel like our books are probably in sort of a similar niche of like historical women-focused romance-ish. Mm-hmm. And but
certainly relationship focused.
Yeah, relationships I think is a better way to put it.
Relationships are really important, I think, in both of them. Do you ever have people like that maybe aren't big fantasy readers pick up your books, Tasha, and then tell you like, I didn't like fantasy, but I like yours?
Yes,
and it's kind of a weird like I'm flattered, but I'm also like, but that means you do like fantasy.
Fantasy is good, really. You'd enjoy it.
Yes. Yeah,
You just kind of want to encourage them to go read other books by other people that you know they'd love.
Right, and then I start throwing books at them, and they're like, maybe I shouldn't tell you about my reading habits anymore because you won't shut up about books when I start talking.
As I worked as a librarian, everyone expects me to give them reading recommendations
that's true.
anyway.
That's like your job, is to tell people things that they should read.
Oh, so we've got, shall we, I can't remember who read the last question. Was it me or was it you?
I think you did. I'll go ahead and just grab the next one on here. Once a series is complete, how do you go about transitioning to another? From Kelly.
I don't know.
I'm sure you are much more professional. I have no idea what I'm doing ever. So
no, I'm clueless, constantly clueless. I mean, I'm starting, my new series was announced. I've got a new series coming up next year. I'm very excited about it. I've been working on it, but in a lot of ways, I accidentally fell into that new series. So it was meant to be another book in the Books of Amber. And then Orbit rightly went, it's kind of different from the other two books, isn't it? And I was like, is it? Oh, yeah, it's completely different.
Would we say so?
Yeah. So I developed that and made a new trilogy on that basis, but I still don't know how you let go of one series that you love and put yourself into the headspace of another one. I think you just kind of have to bully yourself into it. And then once you've done it, I guess you move on to the next series and you do it all over again.
So they tell me. I don't know. Yeah, no, I think maybe partially because I really do think in terms of the characters so much, that the story is about the character. So I think I'm able to kind of like put a bookend on it and say, all right, I wrapped up that character's story, right, and now I can like pull myself into something else completely. But yeah, I think it is, and I think you can kind of get in your own head a little bit with it. Like, am I being too similar to, or am I only doing this because it is, I don't know. It's,
I do think we second guess ourselves a lot.
Instincts on it is kind of interesting, because you kind of, I mean, even if you don't mean to, you end up kind of having a brand in some ways. Like, this is who I am and this is how I write.
Yes, yeah.
But I'm not just being derivative of myself either, I hope.
It's a tricky one, because if you think in your head, I have a brand and there's a specific thing that readers are coming to my book for, I want to give them that thing, but I also want to write what I want to write. But I don't know that we even know what that thing is that readers come for. If I knew, maybe I would, I would make sure I did it.
That's the golden ticket right there.
Yes. But I do think, like on a practical level, moving into a new series, I found making mood boards and soundtracks and things like that really helpful, because it's like setting the mood for this new world, or this new thing.
Yeah, no, and I haven't done the mood boards as much, but I do tend to find music. I tend to find like a few songs that are kind of like my, like, get in my headspace for a particular project, and sometimes I will literally listen to them to psych myself out before I write. So
I can relate to that. Yeah. Let's have a look at these questions. So. Yes. Again, I'm going to, sorry, EB, skip the one about historical accuracy, because I think we've talked about history quite a bit. I really want to pick this one, even though it's not the top voted, because I want to hear your answer.
Pick whatever you want.
Okay. Yeah. Do you have a favorite outfit your main characters wore? That's being asked by Asha, who I believe has a really beautiful cat, if Asha is who I think.
That is too. Gosh. A favorite outfit. I would say there are probably two that come to mind, and one is the pink gown that Sophie makes for Lady Viola in book one. Because I love pink. Asha knows I have an obnoxious, like borderline obnoxious bright pink 18th century gown that I made last year.
Is what you're wearing now pink or peach?
It's sort of a peachy pink. Yeah, I do like pink.
No, that's a good thing. I support you.
As a kid, I was like very like rejecting of the whole pink thing, and then as an adult, I'm like, oh, but I like it. but I do. But the gown in the book is kind of, I imagine it as what we call a zone front, which is when, like right under the bodice, like here it kind of like cuts away, and then you have she has a white like under petticoat, and then it's like pink, and it's very geometrical, and so it's kind of moving away from that like really froofy, over the top, lacy, fluffy, lots of trim rococo, and into that more like pared down late 18th century, lots of like geometric lines and very tailored, but pink. So, and my other one that I really like is that in book 3, Sophie makes herself a riding habit that matches the army uniforms, which is something they actually did in the 18th century. British women, especially high-ranking women, would make have made riding habits that matched their husband's uniforms, and I've always wanted one of those. But after helping to make, I just did the buttonholes on my husband's 18th century military uniform. I hate doing buttonholes, and it's so many buttonholes. So I made this outfit for my character to wear because I cannot wear it.
I do think there's an element of kind of wanting to indulge in that fantasy. I know that when I read the Kushiel books, there are very, very long descriptions of outfits in those books, and I loved every single one of them. There was a description of a cloak, I think, which is like an extremely dark red that's almost black. And I was like, yes, that sounds like a great cloak. I want that cloak.
Well, it's like all the food in fantasy, that there's a bit of like wish fulfillment there. Like there's a clothes wish fulfillment in fantasy
Yes,
too.
there definitely is.
How about yours?
I guess I'm torn. Like I want to say in the first book, Meher wears this outfit when she dances, which is based on a traditional Bharatanatyam outfit, which I don't know that I explained very well in the book, because people have asked me what it looks like, and I think I should have just said it looks like this. But I kind of indulged in a few things I thought would look nice, like having flowers made of stones to go in the hair, or wooden beads, because the traditional outfit, you wear flowers in your hair, but they wouldn't have flowers in a desert. So I was like, what could I do as an alternative? But one of my favorite outfits was actually the one worn by her stepmother at the beginning of the book, which nobody else cares about at all, but I do, which is just a long kind of, it's called like an anarkali type outfit, which she has like a long skirt under a long like dressy top thing, and it's all silky, and I describe the description of it like making a noise against the floor, and I really loved that, and I thought it was evocative, and absolutely nobody else cares, but it just goes to show you can put the little things for yourself into your books.
It's true. And that noise, like, I love that, the noise against the floor. Isn't it I think taffeta, the noise it makes is called scroop.
Oh, it's lovely.
It has a word for it. Scroop.
I don't feel like scroop fits quite what I want. Yeah.
I just love when there's a word for something that you're like, oh, who would have guessed?
Yeah, it means that other people in the past have also wanted a word for that specific thing.
It's true. Looking through here really quickly. And James gives us the question that I always find impossible to answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What is your top recommendation from books you've read this year?
Oh, God.
First off, I have no idea how long this year has lasted, because time has become an amorphous blob that I exist in. So
I don't know when anything comes out either. This is the problem with being an author. You get sent books in advance.
I will say one of my favorite things that I've read in like the past year was reading your draft of Jasmine Throne. I loved reading that. I got to read.
Thank you.
An early,
but nobody can read that yet.
I loved it, but no one can read it yet. But you can put it on your list.
It's being edited at the moment, so it'll be very different by the time it comes out.
Sure, but it has lovely. I'm sure there are lovely bones in it that will be there, because.
Oh, thank you.
It's a good read. What else has happened this year?
So many books are coming out, have come out, will come out. I think that the release date has been delayed, so it's a little bit awkward to suggest it. But Girl Serpent Thorn by Melissa Bashadust, if I pronounce her surname wrong, I'm sorry, is a Persian fairy tale retelling-ish, I would say, about a girl with skin that is poisonous, who is monstrous, and it has a I'd call her a bisexual protagonist and a sapphic romance, and it took all the things I love about fairy tales and fantasy and monstrousness, and it went, come with me, I know what I'm doing, and it was just very confident and wicked, and I just loved it. Such a good
wonderful.
book. I think it was meant to come out in May, but I think it's been delayed because of everything.
Yeah.
But that one was that was a fantastic book.
Deb says that Goodreads says Girl Serpent Thorn comes out July 7th. So.
Oh, okay, yeah. So you should pre-order that because it's really good and it has a beautiful cover as well. It is YA, and very good. That is what
I'm trying to think still of what's coming out soon that I haven't. I got to read Melissa Caruso's Obsidian Tower early, and I really enjoyed it. And I feel like it's a really good right now read because it's absorbing and transporting and fun, but not like it's not like whimsy, goofy fun. It's just like a fun adventure read, and I feel like a lot of people need that right now.
Do you know what it had that it made me think of Howl's Moving Castle, and I don't know why. The Miyazaki film, like it's nothing like that, but it had that kind of transporting quality, like interesting characters. It's not whimsical, but it was really fantastical in a cool, almost traditional way, but doing something new. Mm-hmm. I don't know why it made that connection, but if you like Howl's Moving Castle, maybe you would
might like this.
Yeah.
Well, and speaking of, we're talking about magical systems, and I love the magical system in that book because it's
so good.
She does such fun things with it. Like you never quite know what to expect in terms of how is it going to get used in the book next. And so it's really fun. So now that we've loaded up your TBRs.
Let's see. Am I picking the question? Why am I so bad at remembering sequential order?
Keep talking. You can pick the next question. You can. Well, there's one I can answer very simply, which is some of us learned of a few upcoming adaptations. Are there any talks for either or both of you? I think the upcoming adaptation that person is asking about is probably The City of Brass. Probably Shannon Chakraborty's, yes.
So excited about that. Oh my god.
Yay!
I just want it to be done so I can eat popcorn and watch Netflix.
Yes.
This is all I want.
Can we fast forward?
The shipping wars are going to be so crazy.
Oh, this is true. And all of the fan casting that's going to be like, but that's not how I saw it. I can't wait for the conversations.
I'm so excited for all of. Yes, it's going to be fun. Okay, but the answer is sort of no.
No.
My book is optioned, but it means nothing as far as I can tell. I think that City of Brass is a lot further along in that process, and I'm very excited about it. And I see someone saying Team Ali, and I support you. And I can see that Priyanka has very strong feelings about the Dara casting. All of these are things that I'm very excited to engage in at some point in the future. Is there even a Team Dara? Oh, Travis, if you have been on Twitter, there is absolutely a Team Dara.
All right. So this is an interesting question. Just how do you go about creating characters? Do you utilize character worksheets? Are there questions you have to answer about your characters before you get a good feel from them? And that's from Hadir.
I can't even see that question, but yes.
Oh,
okay. Oh, no, there it is. Yeah.
Okay.
So I think it jumped about. How do you create characters? You go.
Do you create them, or do they just like pop into your head like little Athena
gremlins
ahead of Zeus? Like I feel like I don't really like. I know I'm doing it, but it's not a conscious creation process.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
I think a lot of people often ask, where do you get your ideas? And I think this is sometimes in the same vein. And the answer is that our brains are just trucks of garbage, and occasionally we sort of mash things together and they produce something good. I don't know, we're recycling.
Yes.
I feel like with most of the characters I write, I have an image and a feeling, which is very wishy-washy but is true. And it's like I have a feeling about there's some kind of tension in their body. This sounds really woo-woo, but like with Meher, I felt she was very guarded, and I could, like, my posture's adjusting because that's how she felt, and so I wrote that into her character. Whereas Arwa was just bitter grief and rage, and that was what coursed through her, and so that's what informed her character. And I build the characters around that, and often I don't really know them until I've started editing the book, because I've started with an impulse and a feeling, and then to actually understand everything about them, I kind of have to see the full picture. So that's how it is for me, but I think everyone's process is different.
No, absolutely. And I think, and I don't want to sound like I'm putting down things like character worksheets or things like that, because I think those can be really, you know, depending on how you process this, can be really beneficial. For me, I think one of the best ways is that I to figure out really who my characters are is I like put them in a jar and make them fight. So I like really enjoy writing dialogue, and I enjoy writing banter, and I enjoy writing verbal altercation. So sometimes I'll write those scenes kind of early and make them say what they really think or how they really feel and how they're going to say it and how they're going to engage with each other. And that helps me shape a lot about the character. That is this someone who's going to just tell you exactly what they think, or are they going to kind of talk around it? What's their, you know, is their motivation more about getting what they want, or is it not hurting your feelings? And I think that yeah, I really do. It'll be a bare bones draft, but I'll have these like blocks of dialogue where I've like put them in a jar and I made them fight. And a lot of that gets edited out because it's not really useful to the story beyond whatever kernel of disagreement or whatever comes out of it. But it's often really helpful for me in terms of developing how that character thinks and feels and engages.
I think that's a really good technique. And it reminded me that when I was at university and I did creative writing, not my wisest decision, but nonetheless what I did, one of the things that was suggested to us was come up with a character stereotype, so like the prissy princess or whatever it might be, and put them in a room, and they can't get out of the room, and they have nothing that will help them escape the room. What do they do? And weirdly, that was quite a useful exercise, because you find if you just start writing about somebody in a room, they very quickly start telling you their neuroses, and you start building up a much more complex character. So I don't think there's anything wrong with taking a cliche and working from there, because actually a lot of us are cliches. But there's a lot of nuance under the cliche that comes out when you're writing.
Right. And the sort of getting that those layers of how is someone in public, how does someone perform who they project themselves to be versus who is someone, you know, their deeper motivations and feelings and all those.
Oh yeah, definitely.
All that garbage wadded up in every person.
The garbage that makes up a person.
Yes.
Let's see.
I think. Do you want to pick a question?
Let's see. Oh, you can keep asking questions, guys, if you want to. I might answer this one about the Jasmine Throne, but I think it also is. Hadir has asked, oh, it's jumped. I understand if you can't say too much about this, but how did you go about restructuring the Jasmine Throne into a trilogy? And I think that's also quite an interesting general question about how you structure a trilogy, because I had to think about how to restructure to create one. You actually created one and finished one, and I would be quite interested to hear your answer because you've actually completed the process. I mean, for me, with the Jasmine Throne, the original book I proposed was about a captive princess, and if you've read Realm of Ash, you might realize who the inspiration is for that character, although she's completely different now, I will say. And her efforts to depose her brother from the throne. And then another character came along who was a priestess, essentially, who has lost her position as a child and now wants to get back the power that she lost. And I started building up the story, and my idea was that the character arc ended in a specific place. But where it ended was sort of at the end of the first beats of a first novel in a trilogy. So I didn't actually have to think too much about building a trilogy, because I'd already accidentally done that by just being too lazy to finish the story that the characters were in. which is not necessarily a very satisfying answer, that I kind of accidentally tripped into it. And I think it's much more interesting to maybe think about how you build from a first book in a more practical sense, which is my way of saying, Rowenna, please tell me how to do this.
I mean, again, I have no idea what I am doing. But
congratulations on nonetheless finishing a trilogy.
Thank you. It's even more impressive when you have no idea what you're doing. But when we, you know, we sold Torn and it was going to be 3 books, and so I was like, all right, I have to rethink this. I thought about some of my favorite parts of book 2s and middle movies and things like that that I loved. And my favorite part of a lot of them was that everything falls apart.
Oh, yeah.
That you come to a place in an end of a book 1 that you've wrapped things up at a point that it's like, this could go well. Maybe this could go well. We've got, either we have a plan or we have a tentative conclusion or whatever. And I pushed that into book 2 and kind of what this idea of like, maybe this is going to work. And then everything just like goes to complete pot and falls apart. And that's my favorite part of book 2 is that everything falls apart. And how do people react to everything falling apart? Because, you know, theoretically, you've got a character that you've developed through book 1. They're a different person when they started. And how does that person then react to what they thought was an ending turning out to being just, you know, a beginning? And so that was kind of my book 2 strategy. And then book 3 is when everything kind of has to like wrap up somehow. So in book, I guess long answer to book 3s, I think are easier than book 2s. And if you can create a satisfying book 2, then I think a book 3 will spin itself out. I say that, and I guarantee the next time I write something, I'm going to like completely fail at writing a decent book 3. But we only have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions.
Okay. Shall we look?
Even though we could do this all night, but
apparently,
I will say I will try to answer some of these on Twitter maybe later, maybe tomorrow, or something along those lines. If we don't hit something, I'll try to answer it another time.
I see Dee's asked about post-apocalyptic romance recommendations, but Dee already knows what I recommend as post-apocalyptic romance, so we're going to move on from that one. It's a long story. We've kind of answered the question about authors who inspired us, right? I
think so. I think we've answered.
Yeah.
So honestly, this is the question I'm interested in your answer to, Tasha. What small world building choices have you made that ended up having a larger impact on the story? Or maybe not even just world building, but I would even bust that one out to small choices that ended up being more impactful than maybe you expected.
Gosh. Small choices that ended up being impactful. It's weird because I don't feel like any choice is actually that small. They all have a huge impact, even if it's something as simple as how is transport arranged in this world.
Right.
It changes everything about how the world functions. For me, the big thing that had an impact on the world of Empire of Sand and Realm of Ash was the choice of how marriage functions, because that defined everything for both the main character of the first book and the second book. Because in the first book, she's forced into an arranged marriage. In the second book, her sister is a widow. So the understanding of how marriage functions affected both of them. But I don't think that's a small thing, though. Not in their lives, at least.
Right, and I think that it's a really good point, though. That's something that if you're not thinking holistically about your world and about your characters, could seem like a throwaway thing. You know, how does marriage function? How does a family work? And I think that anything like that, for, again, we were talking about individual character stakes, becomes very, very important.
Do we have time for another question, or is that?
I think perhaps we should wrap ourselves up. You know what would be a good wrap up would be, can you tell us about any upcoming projects?
I see that one. Orbit have nudged us on that question.
Yes. Thank you, Orbit, for nudging us.
do you want to go first,
Oh,
or?
I don't have anything official at the moment in terms of upcoming projects, but I've got two different worlds that I'm writing in right now, just kind of have works in progress. So
I may know about one of them.
you do know about
yes.
one of them.
And I'm very excited to see where that one goes.
So hopefully we'll visit another world sometime soon. I did have someone ask me earlier today if I was at all interested in writing anything else in the world I've already written, and I not at this point. I kind of am liking putting a bookend on it, and maybe I'll come back to it another time. But I kind of need a palette refresher, I think.
There's always a maybe, isn't there?
Different. Yeah, no, but because there's still so much. You build a world and you only play in one corner of it, and there's still
all of this other stuff.
A bunch of it geographically and time-wise, and all these characters that could have exciting lives. So we'll see. We'll see.
Go on, sorry.
No, and you?
Oh, okay. I have a new trilogy coming out next year. I believe it'll be confirmed at some point, but I believe it's in April. It starts with a book called The Jasmine Throne, and it is a story of a captive princess and a priestess who is hiding as a maidservant, who have to work together to defeat a rather nasty emperor king guy who is the princess's brother. I'm much better at the pitch usually. It has a sapphic romance at its heart, but it's also got a bunch of other disaster characters failing to do the things that they had started the book intending to do, much like all the people we love in our lives. It's a trilogy, and I am very, very fond of it, and I hope you will enjoy it whenever it decides to meander into the world as books do.
And I have one more question that is not book related. What, especially in the midst of, what is something that's making you happy right now?
Apart from my cat yowling at me?
Apart from your cat, and you're allowed to say The Untamed again, but something.
Okay, yes. Watching The Untamed on repeat. It's 50 episodes, so about 50 hours worth of content, and also watching the entirety of RuPaul's Drag Race from season 1 is something that has kept me very, very entertained.
Fantastic.
But what about you?
I am enjoying my chickens. We got chickens this spring, and they are idiots, and they're so much fun to watch.
And you were going to post pictures of your chickens on Twitter after this, aren't you?
So I need to put some up there. I literally went and opened the front door today, and they were all just standing there, which was a little creepy, but also funny because they're just kind of like.
Chickens are hilarious. I love them.
I'm enjoying that, and I'm enjoying, also enjoying The Untamed, even if I'm not all the way through it yet.
I'm so thrilled I managed to get you to watch it. I'm assuming it was me. I'm taking responsibility.
It was you and Alexandra Rowland, both of you.
Yes. I will tell them.
Yes, I have already.
Oh, okay.
Darn you. But yes, it was lovely talking to you. And
it was lovely talking to you too.
And hearing Asami. And thank you all so much for being here. This was fantastic.
Thank you so much. It's been really fun, and the questions were really lovely. So thank you for being here. And we're now going to wave awkwardly goodbye.
Yes.
Well, I will wave awkwardly.
I will, and I believe this is available still if you came in at the end. I believe it's still available to stream from the beginning if you missed any of it. So feel free to watch the replay. Tell your friends to watch the replay. And like I said, I'll check the questions, and if we missed any, I'll try to answer any that pertain to me on Twitter, maybe tomorrow, or something along those lines. So yes, have a lovely evening, everyone.